All right. All right. So good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to our activist teach-in. I've kind of mixed it up today. I'm using the black logo for Emmy Action versus the red logo. I'm having a black mood today, so that's why I'm changing it to that one. So I'm Terry Wilder. I'll be your host today for Activist Teach-In. Today will be, the topic is Speak Up, Tweet Back, Write ME, Activist Messaging 101 in the Social Media Age. Today is Sunday, August 13th. And I'm really excited about this topic today. I've had several people over the last several months reach out to me saying that they really wanted to have a teach-in specifically on this topic. As many of you know, on our call today, one of our biggest hurdles is awareness and raising the profile of ME as a disease, but also about our stories as individuals and families living with ME. So I'm so glad that we were able to do this today. But before we get started, just a couple of things. If you're on the phone, please make sure you mute so we don't have any background noise. If you are logging in via your computer, if you aren't muted, please do that. Ben probably muted folks so we can not have background noise. There's a chat box function if you're logging in via your computer. Please feel free to use that to ask questions or make comments if you don't feel comfortable saying anything out loud during the discussion. We will have discussion and questions after our presentations. So we have 3 presentations today. The first one is going to be the longest. The 2 after that will be about 5 minutes each, but we should have plenty of time for facilitated discussion and questions. We tend to be a really chatty group, so we always seem to fill that time. And just as a reminder, we are recording this teach-in today. We want to make sure that folks who, for whatever reason, weren't able to join us get to see it later, and it'll be posted on the ME Action website. So I'm going to start by introducing our first speaker today. It's Jennifer Avril. She's actually one of my really dear friends, and so I was really pleased that she was able to join us today. She is a writer and a communications professional specializing in advocacy and social justice causes. She writes about HIV activism for thebody.com, which is the largest HIV website in the world with over 1 million visitors a year. She's a master's candidate in media studies for social justice at Queens College CUNY, which is a college here in New York City where we live and breathe. And so, again, super thrilled that she's available today, and I'm going to turn it over to her. But you may hear me kind of adding some additional information as she's speaking. So I'm going to turn it over to her now.
Are you advancing the slide?
You can.
Okay. Yeah. Good morning. Hi. Good morning. Good afternoon. And good evening. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really happy to be here. As Terry mentioned, we've been friends for some time, and we've worked together on various activist endeavors. I'm really happy to be sharing this information with you today. I just want to start by saying I understand that there's a large group here today, and there's probably a wide range of experience with some of the things we'll be talking about, such as social media. I'm hoping to help everybody get comfortable, and if you have never used Twitter, for example, or never used Facebook, that's something we can absolutely talk about in the Q&A. But you may see that I've assumed a little bit of knowledge in the initial slides. So. Media coverage can be increased and improved by your storytelling. Today, we're going to focus on the following. So the first and most important thing I think we'll focus on today is storytelling for activism. What does that mean? What is a story? And how can we use our stories, personal stories and stories about ME in order to spread awareness, get people to come to events and actions, get people to share our stories, and more deeply understand ME and the challenges and the goals that you're looking to reach. Under that general umbrella, we'll talk a little bit about working with the press, how you can speak to the press, both when media are telling your story or when you're telling your own story. And that will include writing for publication, some sort of tips on that. We'll talk about using social media, including how to create and use a social media kit, which is something I recommend for advocacy groups. I've done them as a contract worker. I've done them for my own folks and our activist endeavors. They're really crucial because I think when you have a kit, just like when you have a lot of the overview ideas we'll talk about today, it helps ground you in some basics so you don't feel lost at sea as to where to get started when you're tweeting or posting things on Facebook and so on. And then we'll also talk a little bit about video documenting. I just feel I need to put a quick disclaimer here. I'm not personally a videographer. I do podcasting and audio technology, but I'm not a video documentarian. So I'll kind of be giving you the layman's view of that, and some of that is based on the work of another mutual acquaintance of Terry's and mine and a friend, Brandon Quickie, who is a video documentarian. So I've taken from his teaching on that. Okay, storytelling for activism. So one thing Terry helped me with a lot today is grounding the examples that you'll see in this teach-in in ME and CFS and telling those stories versus just giving you generic examples. I come from a background in HIV and AIDS activism, and one kind of core tenet of that is nothing for us without us. So I believe that very strongly as someone working in communications in this area, that every story that's told has to be grounded in real experience and with the viewpoint and the knowledge of the people affected by and living that experience. So in this case, because this is just such a wonderful image. Sorry?
Oh, I think somebody needs to mute.
Okay, I think we need someone to mute. And it sounds like they muted and we're good. Okay, we're going to continue. So this example is from the Sunday Review. It's called Getting It Wrong on Chronic Fatigue Syndrome. And I'm going to ask Terry to chime in a little bit with the background of the story. But it is co-written by Julie Remeyer, who has ME, and David Tuller, who is a longtime HIV/AIDS activist, an advocate with an interest in ME, and they co-wrote this story. So Terry, that's it. Apparently, that's the whole thing. So they co-wrote this story. I thought this made a very stirring starting image. First of all, because of the beauty of the image itself, and that little figure in the foreground trying to understand this greater sleeping figure. The story in general is, can you just talk a little bit about what the study was about?
Well, so I think the important piece is that of this image is to highlight that a person with ME co-wrote this piece, right. And that it kind of starts us off by talking about the importance of our story, right. And being the author of our stories, not letting other people tell our stories for us. And so that's why this is included here, because Julie is a person living with ME. And so I just wanted to include that as a start off. As some people may know, she's actually a journalist that has a background in science, who then was later diagnosed with ME. So she has this amazing skill set that she can bring because she is a journalist. She also has an understanding of science, and recognizing that we all don't have that. I don't either. I'm not a journalist. I don't have a background in science like she does. But I think that the importance of just kind of showing this image is that, that who tells our story is very important, and the best way for our story to be told is for us to be the storyteller.
Right. And to that end, something we'll touch on a few times. Thank you for that. And something we'll touch on over the course of this webinar also is that I think, especially if you're just getting started and just starting to think about how you're going to share and tell stories, or how you're going to tweet, or how you're going to communicate about your activism and about your illness, it can feel intimidating. It can feel intimidating to figure out where to start. Some of these examples we're using because I want to make it really clear to everybody here that storytelling is something we all interact with all the time, every day, especially in our cultures. We interact with it through reading the paper, watching news, talking to friends, having friends talk to us, watching films and TV. Most of our entertainment has to do with storytelling. So even if you feel that maybe you're not the best storyteller or you don't know where to start, I don't want these examples to be intimidating because, as Terry said, these particular writers have a deep background in what they're talking about. More to the point, I want to sort of get across the idea that you already know a lot of this, and we'll help you take these basic concepts and then use them in your own work. Our storytelling is a powerful component of activism. These are two very personal stories, and I kind of love how they work together here. One is an article, Life Without Sex, from Men's Journal, which Terry showed me a while ago, which is an absolutely arresting article. If you have an opportunity to read it, I would recommend it. It is by Jameson Hill. And as you can see, it was published in Men's Journal. So it is about his experience of having ME and how that's affected his sex life. But it also touches on, because he's a very powerful storyteller, he's been a blogger, I think, for a long time, and a writer. It touches on all these other things that are going to be interested to pretty much any person reading Men's Journal: sexuality, masculinity, what it means to be virile or not virile in our society, how he didn't expect to encounter these things when he had an illness. So it takes, so Emmy is threaded throughout every sentence of the story, but the story is his story. So that's one thing we wanted to get across. Next to that, and I love how these two things complement each other, and I thank Terry again for all these great examples, is a story by Natalie Wright. I believe this is from The Guardian. The photograph, I believe, is from one of the Millions Missing actions with the shoes. You can see, especially also, there are a lot of women's shoes here. And her core thesis of the story is ME affects 4 times as many women as men. Is that why they're disbelieved? Is that why we're still disbelieved? So it's an opinion piece. Also, ME is threaded through every sentence of the story, but she's talking about sexism and feminism and the fact that women are often not heard and ignored in our society, even when we speak up, and how that relates to the struggle of ME. So she's able to tell a larger story about a more general topic to a more general audience while also educating that audience, I think, really effectively. A story is not just a series of facts. It is the creation of an experience for your audience. It is defined and has a narrative arc. Again, these are very large examples, but I'm using them to show how we interact with storytelling all the time. So this is unrest, which I think a lot of you are probably aware of. I would Terry's saying yes, everybody's aware of it, but she can also chime in a little bit here if she wants to, which is a film that I believe is coming out soon. It's out. It's already out, and I've seen a lot of press on it, actually, which speaks very well to its pertinence. And then Through the Shadowlands, which is a book by Julie Raymeyer, who we saw her article at the beginning of this. If you've watched a film, if you've read a book, you understand what a story is. It has a narrative arc. It should ideally take the person reading it or viewing it right into what's happening and allow them to see what you see with their own eyes. Do you have anything you want to add to that? Okay, so we're going to move on. Activist storytelling creates understanding, and it's crucial for effective action. So we use these 2 examples here to kind of show our own narrative arc. The first is, I believe, kind of how would you characterize that? The ad that was used on Facebook,
the poster.
Yeah, the poster, the call to action for the European-wide Millions Missing action. And as you can see, it has very arresting design. We'll talk about some of these elements a little bit later. And then next to that is one of Terry's Twitter tweets, one of her posts, saying the New York Health Commissioner sent letter to every physician in the state about ME. And then she has her cute little emojis and the hashtag Millions Missing. We'll talk about hashtags a little bit more later. I just kind of want to call your attention to the fact that hashtags do have a purpose and they're important. I'll explain that as we go on. And what we liked about this is that there's the relationship between the two. Is basically, the tweet allows Terry to continue to tell the story being that she spoke to the New York Health Commissioner and told her story to an audience that created this next action of a big step forward for New York State in terms of Emmy awareness, and that was, would you say, a direct result of the Emmy action, Millions Missing protests. Anything else you want to add?
Right. I mean, I would just say that, the examples here, these are vehicles for us to tell our story. So the poster of, the Emmy action, Join Us in European-wide protest, that is a vehicle to tell stories. People stand up at protests and a megaphone and tell their stories. If press is there, they then pick up that story. And I think that the Twitter is one part of me kind of announcing to other people that the New York State Health Commissioner letter went out. But I think the important piece to this in terms of what we're talking about today is that it started with a story. It started with me seeing the health commissioner at an event and walking up to him and saying, I'm Terry Wilder. You may know me because I work in HIV. But what I want to tell you about today is something personal, that I'm living with an illness, and then telling him that story, that leading to a phone call with a senior leadership person who then I told my story to again. Hearing that story then motivated them to say, there's not a lot going on in New York State about ME. We have the power to do this. The story is motivating us to, respond. And so I think, the points of this tweet is to say that it all started with a story, a personal story about a person living with ME in New York State.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move forward. Working with the press. Don't be intimidated by all those microphones. Easy to say. Okay, I just wanted to ground you a little bit in a couple of things that mean a lot to me personally, that have really informed my own viewpoint about working with media. I worked in public relations and marketing for a very long time in various fields, including nonprofit, but also including things like technology, before I became an activist. And now I'm, as Terry mentioned, studying media studies for social justice at Queens College. So these are a couple of, I think, core tenets for me that I just wanted to share with you briefly, because it sort of informs what we'll be talking about. So Stuart Hall, I won't go into him at length. He mostly, as a writer, in the period this quote is from, was writing about television newscasting and broadcasting. He was writing about this, I think, around 1980. So his ideas at the time were very new about the gap between what was being said by a news anchor, for example, and how the public was perceiving it. Marketing studies and audience studies were really a very new idea at that time. So what he says that I love, and I want to tell you, is the media creator and the media consumer both have power to determine the message. So I think there's two things to take away from that. One is that we can often feel like people aren't hearing us. Sometimes they are not hearing us. It's not always our job to get through the reasons they're not hearing us, but we can find people in media who will hear us. As a media creator, which is what I'm hoping to empower everybody listening to this to be, in whatever way, you are going to tell your story, and the consumer, when you find the right audience and you tell your story the right way, hopefully what we're working to achieve is that gap will get very narrow and your story will be told. Something I was mentioning to Terry earlier is, as a PR person, I feel very lucky. My very first job was working for a woman who ran her own agency and had been an anthropologist in her previous work life. And something she really instilled in me is the idea of translation. It's real easy when you're in any group, whether that's your work life, your illness, your group of friends, your family, your political group, whatever it is, to talk in your own shorthand. I think a lot of the time we don't even realize we're doing it. And other people don't necessarily understand what we're talking about. I think you have some challenges specifically because you have an invisible illness, an illness that doesn't have biomarkers, that hasn't had a lot of press, that you have that much more to have to translate. So finding easy, graphic ways and bridging that gap through personal stories, I think is of great value here. The second quote is from a long time. She's thought of, I think we could say, as the mother of HIV communications, Ann Northrop, who's just an amazing lady. And if you have time to find out more about her, I would encourage you to do so. When ACT UP started in New York in the early to mid '80s, she had a long career already at that point under her belt in mainstream media. And the thing she really taught people at that time was, don't speak to the media, speak through the media. Media is, as Terry aptly put, a vehicle through which to tell your story. I think that speaks also to not over-investing the media with authority it maybe doesn't deserve, that you're here to tell your story. Writing a press release. Writing a press release is really an easy format. It can feel intimidating. I would really recommend, and maybe we can do some follow-up. My email will be at the end of this if people want examples, but there'll be an example here. ME Action seems to post all of its press releases on the website, so they're easy to look through. But it really is generally a pretty simple format, and one that can take a lifetime to master. So the first question is, what are you promoting? Is this an event that will happen? Do you want press to come? Is it an event that already happened and you want it reported on? Is it a campaign, meaning an ongoing issue that you're focusing your attention and resources around? Having something to peg a press release to is ideal. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. What's the story? In all cases, you want to make it very easy for reporters to write. I think I mentioned this later, but I'm not sure if we took the slide out, but a mutual friend of Terry's and mine, Mateo Rodriguez, who's a reporter, said to us that 90% of his emails that are press releases, he does not even open. He just deletes them. So your headline, which is certainly not my forte, is something that's really important when writing, when sending an email to a reporter, and making it very, very clear what the story is. You want to front load the info. So the old axiom of a story is made up of who, what, when, where, and why is absolutely true. That should be in your first paragraph. A trap that I think is easy for people who, like myself, like to write is we start telling the story like we're writing a novel, and 3 paragraphs in, we haven't gotten to that information. So that absolutely must be in your first paragraph. And something I didn't include here is contact information has to be very clear. If you're working with or through ME Action, I assume that there's a template and a process in place, and some of those things it'll be easy to know who your contact is and so forth. Liven it up. Something that we see recently emerging in press releases is that they'll include links to tweets about the topic. They'll include social media posts, pictures, and quotes. Again, we want to make the reporter's job as easy as possible, and more online media. As a reporter, I've worked on pieces that were half tweets or half GIFs, or just a lot of social media embedded, because people like to look at social media and scroll through it. So anything you can do to help the reporter write the story, to make the story write itself, is great. And also provide everything that you can think of up front. These are things that often get lost in the shuffle. So if you're including photographs, credit the photographer. A publication has to have that information. They have to know the photographer's allowing the photo to be run. Include a link to anything you can think of, and what the hyperlink is. Those are typically embedded when you see them online. So we have an example here. It's not a full example, but again, this is being recorded, so you can go back and look at it. You can also find this at ME Action. It's about the NYC activist protest. I was at this protest with Terry, and as Terry chose this one, I think it was smart to choose it. It's very clear what's being asked for here. The headline is clear, time and date are right at the top. It looks very clean. What ME is also right at the top in bold. So if a reporter's never heard of it, they have somewhere to start. And then all that who, what, when, where, why information is in your first paragraph. I'm just going to leave this here for a second. That's just to give you an idea of what a clean press release should look like. Working with reporters, I did put that 90% in. Okay, so reporters don't have time. Do as much of their work for them as you can. Reporters can't pitch topics, they need stories. Something that is easy to forget is that when you've pitched a story, the reporter often is going to go pitch that story to their editor. So if this is not a story that's been assigned, they need to convince their editor that it fits into what their beat is. That's the things the reporter typically writes about, and who their audience is. So again, making this easy and story-based and personal is going to help the reporter and is going to help you. Here's the thing about the news, it's new. That is also an axiom from our friend, Matteo. You want to be topical and hitched into what's happening as much as you can be. So that includes what's happening within the world of ME and ME action, but it also includes what's happening in healthcare, what's happening in politics, what's happening socially, and when we can start to tie those issues together, that can also build a powerful story. And again, there's that 90%. Speaking with reporters. If you're pitching, meaning if you're calling to follow up on a story and that you have sent a press release on, and I don't entirely know that I would recommend this at this point. I think it depends very much on the publication. And one thing I left out here is that when you're pitching a publication, know what the publication is. I think it's one thing that's going to drive a reporter crazy is if you call them and you don't really know what they write about or what the publication is. Be friendly. Say up front why you're calling. Ask them if they have time right now, because they may appreciate that and they may give you a time to call them back. Have a clear ask. So if there's an event and you'd like the reporter to attend, or there will be video and you'd like the reporter to consider it, so on, make that part of your pitch. Don't ask if they received the press release. You can say, I sent you a press release or I'm calling to let you know about, and this was emailed to you, but don't ask if they received the press release. I promise you they have no idea. If you're being interviewed, take the time you need to answer questions. I think some of us can feel flummoxed or nervous, and if you need to take a moment to regroup, feel free to have notes by you. Stay on topic. It can be tricky when you're talking about a personal experience to not drift off into the entire history of your experience or side tangents. That's part of how we speak to each other. Try to keep your focus very narrow, and if that includes just having on a piece of paper 3 bullet points with 3 words that you're going to try to say over the course of this 5-minute conversation, then fantastic. Also, you can ask for the format that you're most comfortable with. I would recommend this to anybody. Some people are not comfortable speaking publicly, but I also understand that some people on this call may not be able to speak, may not be able to type. You can ask for the format you're most comfortable with. If that's texting, if that's having questions sent to you and then working them through with a friend who's a writer or a relative who can answer for you, that is always fine. A good reporter should honor those kinds of requests unless they're on an extreme deadline, and even then, typically it shouldn't be a problem. So you have power and autonomy. You have agency in this situation to determine how you can communicate. Writing for publication. What we're going to cover here is not so much writing mainstream articles. I think that's sort of an advanced version of this talk and one I'm maybe not entirely qualified to give. But we're going to talk about opportunities that an audience would have to write for publication. So here that's going to be primarily op-eds and letters to the editor. This is an example by Anne Brennan speaking about her experience with ME. And again, I'm going to just ask Terry to chime in a little bit. That's all. She's shrugging. Do you have anything else to say?
Yeah, I mean, I just was looking for different articles by people with ME and saw this. And I just kind of really appreciated that she just kind of, her very first her very first sentence really kind of grabbed me. 5 years ago, I was flying high. I was a partner in my Dublin law firm, a zealous skier, an untalented tag rugby player, which was kind of funny. I taught yoga in the evenings and at weekends, never missed a party. I love live music and often stood for hours waiting to see. And then she names all the artists. And I thought it was really, she grabbed me because I thought it was funny that she acknowledged she was an untalented tag rugby player. And then it grabbed me because she loves live music, and so did I. So like those are things that I was like, oh, this person's interesting to me. Like even if I didn't have ME, I would probably read this just because I've already connected with this writer, because she is funny to me and she enjoys something that I enjoy. So I just thought it was a good example of like how somebody could like hook a reader like from the very first sentence.
Thank you. And I think that brings up a good point too, which is that any story in any publication, whether it's an op-ed in this case or a letter to the editor, it's not necessary to connect with every single person reading it, but you're going to connect with somebody, and you're going to connect with the publication will have already decided you're going to connect with enough of their readership that it's worth their time to run your piece. So. Letters to the editor, I took this from the Berkeley Media Studies group, which if you want to learn more about communications as a citizen, I would recommend checking out their website. They have some really good information. But these are their basic rules. So a letter to the editor, you are replying to a story that you've read generally. You want to respond quickly. So again, that goes back to what we said earlier, which is the thing about the news is it's new. Rather like a press release, you want to be clear about why you're in touch right in the beginning. So you're going to mention the reason you're writing. You can cite the original article, preferably in the first sentence, and then limit the content to one or two key points. Take a strong position. Letters to the editor are meant to show the involvement and engagement of readers. So, to just write and say, that was really nice, thank you, is not why you're writing. You're writing because you either had strong opposition or strong support, or you have an additional point of view or want to bring something in that you felt was missing or could benefit from being brought out. Make sure to include your full name and contact information. That is merely because they're going to want to often they'll want to verify your identity and make sure they have your permission to run the piece. Look up editorial policies for each outlet you submit to. That mainly means what their word count is going to be. You're going to see some variation in that from publication to publication. Some might be 250, some might be 500. I would say also don't assume an editor is going to edit down your piece. You want to send them something very complete. And if that means that a friend takes a look at what you wrote and copy edits it, and again, if you're dictating to somebody, then you look over it carefully, spell check it, all the things you would do to submit a good, clean document to someone. Keep that in mind, especially because these are less edited than anything else that the publication will run. And don't send the same letter to competing publications. I think that's pretty clear. Okay, an op-ed. Op-eds typically have a 500-word maximum. I have seen longer, but again, you want to be aware of the publication when you're sending it. And normally, you're going to be interested in sending in these kinds of written pieces if you're a reader. I mean, that's where it makes the most sense to me. Just like letter to the editor, tell a timely story with a strong point of view. The difference is going to be, this is when you write it, it'll be framed a little bit more like an article and a little less like a letter, but they are kind of similar in content. Contact the op-ed editor by email or phone to propose. So there's really, you could write out an overview or your ideas or get them down somehow prior to getting in contact, but there's no need, I think, to write a complete op-ed without having that assignment having been accepted already. If you are accepted, there's usually about a turnaround of 1 week's time. And I would recommend looking at other op-eds in that publication so you get a general idea of tone, although op-eds can vary wildly, as we've seen recently here in the New York Times. The op-eds in their tone and the range of writers has recently kind of exploded. And use the materials you already have. So
I think we need to have somebody mute.
I think we may need to have someone mute out. We're getting some feedback. If you're not on mute. Oh, hi. Good to see you, though. Okay. Yeah, you're good. Thank you. And use the materials you already have. So I think I'm guilty of this, and I think it can feel like you have to sit down and write the whole thing from scratch. If you already have this wealth of information from ME Action, from past press releases, from other things you've seen, use what you have. Just be careful not, of course, to plagiarize anybody, or if you're quoting someone, to quote them clearly. Social media and social media kits. So we're going to talk about here sort of the most popularly used and prevalent types of social media, which I think are Facebook and Twitter. I know that's not as true in every country as it is in the States, but I think it's generally true in Europe. And we also have YouTube. We're going to touch on social media and video a little bit later, but we can certainly talk about that. And at the end of the call, when we do our Q&A, if anyone would like to ask me about other types of media, please let me know. Other types of social media platforms that you may be already using, like if you love Instagram, if you love Pinterest, we can talk about that, but I see that used a little less for this kind of action. So we have a tweet and a Facebook post here. Social media has become the best tool outside mainstream media for activists to get their message out. I think these are pretty self-explanatory. Again, you see the hashtags there. I do want to say my note about hashtags right now. Something that people often forget is that hashtags are a way of kind of creating a cute, clever headline. They can be. They are also an indexing system. What hashtags really are is the Dewey Decimal System of web platforms. So every time you hashtag something, millions missing, you ensure that anybody searching that hashtag will be able to find it. So I would say, Terry included on the social media kit that we're going to show you now some of the most popular hashtags for ME Action. I'd really recommend using at least a few of them whenever you tweet or have a Facebook post. If you're using Instagram, it's even recommended you use all the hashtags. Fear not, the social media kit will organize and prepare your members to post about your cause or event. So the idea here is to be prepared. Can sort of feel like a large open area with nowhere to go when you're doing social media. So these are just some ideas. And again, this will be in the playback. I'm a big fan of twibbon.com, which is a way to change your profile pic so that it has something around it all the time. And that's something you can encourage friends and family to do with an ME Action graphic. These are ME Action's social media channels. So liking and following them will keep you in touch with what's going on, and you can repost that information. When you have created a social media kit, so as a person doing communications, I would make one of these if I had a big event coming up, or in general for folks to be aware of. So that would include a place for people to find graphics, and good and current graphics, and to be updated frequently. And sample posts we're going to get to in the next screen, but as you can see, some of the hashtags that you're probably very familiar with. Again, I would recommend using them as often as you can. Be shy about hashtags. So Twitter, here's a sample. We used ME Awareness Day for our samples. So this is a sample of what we might share with the ME Action community in this next year. So these are just ideas. This is not necessarily what you're doing next year. But with millions missing every day, people with ME need your help now. Join in action with the link. I think I may have committed a serious faux pas here and not checked my count, but you always, with Twitter, 140 characters, and they cut you off. So that's the number of characters, not words, characters. And then something on the day would be a little more, forthright and have a link. That link could be to streaming video. It could be to, more information. It could be to your press release. Facebook gives you a little more room to talk, and I think that's a good place to insert more personal experiences because you're sharing more with your own people already. And prepackaged 2-line stories, I think, is always a great way to do storytelling on social media. Just a brief word about some other platforms like Instagram and Tumblr and Pinterest. people often, especially on Instagram, are sharing their own pictures. You're not going to see prepackaged infographics as much on a platform like Instagram. So it's a great place where if you're at an action and you're taking photos, you can post them. I'd also recommend that all the time, but especially on Instagram, that's all you're going to see. Instagram also encourages lots of hashtags. It's just part of the culture, I would say, more than anything else. And these are great platforms for post-event and post-action pictures and sharing them. Terry found this, I love it. 90% of all information transmitted to our brains is visual. People remember 80% of what they see, but only 20% of what they read. How's that for an example? So a lot of you may be familiar with this action. I am going to ask Terry to describe it for you now.
Great. So folks may or may not know, so this was from the London Millions Missing, and this is a woman who actually is living with ME, and this was what she did at the protest. My understanding from people who know her was that it literally took her weeks to prepare for this, because she, had to physically prepare herself, because she knew that this could potentially cause a crash. Standing outside completely naked in the elements during a protest, where you may be nervous and stressed. But, when I saw it, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. She's brilliant. There's so many things that this image says to me. You can't ignore me now. It's a play on me as an individual living with ME. It's a play on how we refer to our illness as ME. She's completely naked when we often feel invisible. You cannot miss her. She's completely naked, which is, taboo in a lot of our cultures, to be outside, be naked without clothing. She, has this a cloth across her eyelids, which represents
Justice is blind.
Justice is blind. And when I saw it, I immediately posted it on Facebook. I immediately tweeted it out, because I was like, to think of people in London walking by, had they never even heard about ME, if they never took one of the flyers from a protester and they saw that woman standing there naked, they're going to be like, what is this about? Why is she standing there naked? And then somebody tells them, they're never going to forget that image. Oh my God, I saw this woman standing naked. And the reason why she was standing naked is because there's this illness called ME, and nobody cares about it. And she was bringing attention to it because she has it. And it's a terrible illness that impacts people's life. The story, that visual just could cause this snowball effect. And so even to this day, I think about her standing out there and how courageous she was to do that, but also how so brilliant an idea that she did. I'm not saying that everybody should go out and get naked, but I'm like, it's brilliant. And those are the kind of things that we need in terms of images to grab people's attention.
Two very quick things about that, because I know we're running short on time. One is that, first of all, I love this image tremendously, and it's basically a piece of art, which is incredible. It can be very tempting in an image to cram in as much information as you want. I think this speaks really well to the fact that an image should work as an image. There's a little text, but it's extremely pointed. It's very brief, but it makes you want to then find out her story. And also, this works so well both as a live event. As Terry said, it must have been so arresting to walk by this woman and see what she was doing. But also, it is what they would call in marketing social media friendly as heck. It doesn't get more social media friendly than that. That is something you want to show other people. Okay, video documenting. This is not my forte, but I know enough to kind of give you a working knowledge, I would say, especially if you like taking video. The wonderful thing about cell phones is that so many people now are empowered to take video on the fly. You don't need to know a lot about how to do it. You can find out about editing later, but live and streaming video or just posting videos taken live is really sufficient, especially for live events, and also for video blogging is another thing that one could do, is talk about a topic for a minute, and then post that. I think could be a very powerful way of communicating as well. This is Rivka Solomon. Both of these examples are Rivka. They're on YouTube. One of them is, I believe, it was San Francisco Millions Missing. San Francisco Millions Missing. Well, my question is it live stream or is it?
So it was.
That was live stream.
Yeah. So it was. They had somebody record the millions missing, and they posted it up. And then the second example is Rivka speaking at a town hall, and a person, I'm assuming it may have been her husband, videotaped her basically bird dogging, asking at Senator Markey's town hall to help people with ME. And then it got posted up on the ME Action YouTube. These are just ways of showing that, where one may have been more of a professional videographer with, a professional camera, but then here's another one where a person could use it with their iPhone and still have the same effect and amplify the message that, town hall bird dogging works because for many of us in the United States, we know that Senator Markey has become a champion for us in ME.
Thank you. Thanks. Why video yourselves? I actually love this.
For 1 second. I'm sorry, Jude. This is Ben Suborger, and I just wanted to make a note for some of you that who might be live streaming things, particularly Millions Missing events. We also have an aggregator, a video aggregator site that will take all your different posts on it, put them together in one place. So I'm going to put in the chat box. If you have live stream videos that you do, you should definitely upload them to there. And that it's just a central place that people can see all the different ones, so we can kind of crowdsource that. That's all I wanted to say.
That's awesome. Thank you for including that. And also in the Q&A, I hope if you have any additional information like that about how ME Action handles video, please chime in about that because that'll be really helpful. Thanks a lot. So why video yourselves? To give a sense of pride and value in your work. I think more than any other medium, honestly, video is very arresting. Seeing oneself in a video, aside from the fact that it may make us feel sheepish about how we look that day, or it may be hard for some people to see themselves in video for a variety of reasons. It can be very affecting to see yourself in media. It can be very affecting to see the people working with you in media. Also, for someone who, let's say, when ME Action happened, and a lot of people could not attend because they were not well enough or not in a location where they could attend, and a Millions Missing event, to then be able to go back and watch media of Millions Missing, I think that fosters a great deal of solidarity, makes you feel like you have a community, especially with something like ME, where it's an invisible illness and you can't necessarily gather, or you're fragmented in different places. It's a wonderful method. So I really recommend video, especially for ME Action. Why share and post videos online? As Ben just said, there's an aggregate that allows you to do that with ME Action. I really recommend learning more about that and using it. It can help to shape dialogue around your issue. People can interact and share. It can feel more personal also to get to see people that you've only maybe seen in chat or post things, and then you see them live and you get to know who they are. It helps spread your message, and it's again, a video is it's a medium we're really familiar with and we're used to sharing outside of sharing personal things. We share video clips with each other all the time and watch them all the time. So it's very natural, I think. So live streaming, which simply means broadcasting a video live while it's happening. In the example we gave with Rivka, there was a live stream and an edited version. It can often be of the same thing. It documents your event for news or archival purposes. It allows people not on site to join you. So if you were, for example, at a town hall and speaking, it would allow other people in your group to see you at the town hall. In an action, and this may not be so pertinent to you, but I'm just going to run through these anyway. It can prevent violence against protesters when you have people with their video cameras out. That can keep things safer, honestly. And can serve as evidence in case there are arrests. That's also true. It can save your demo. If you have a demonstration and 3 people show up and there's nobody there, you can live broadcast it and have 50 or 100 people share it, and then that demo has value that maybe you would have lost otherwise. Possible negatives. It's hard to lead or marshal a demo while you're shooting. If you're doing anything other than shooting video, don't shoot the video. You need to just be paying attention to what you're doing. So if you have another role, if you're speaking, you don't also want to be the videographer, even if that is just on your cell phone. If you're not careful, you may implicate your group members. This is, I think we're not speaking of, since I'm not giving a talk with PETA, and typically you're not, breaking into laboratories, I don't think this is so much of an issue. But, if I do have to say, if your activity could be construed as illegal in any way, you may not want to video it. Edited. Editing video is its own art form and skill. There are tools online to make it easier, but if it's not something that interests you, I wouldn't pursue it, honestly. But edited video is very useful. It also takes video that you've taken and allows you to use it again and again. So you can tease out a demonstration. You can, again, pop on your phone for a minute and talk about something that you feel passionate about. Say that something's coming. Something we've done in ACT UP is if we're preparing for a big event, we might say, we're live from a secret location and we're building an amazing puppet, and you'll see it on Monday, that kind of thing. It can help you, again, communicate messages. It can help you recap an event. Edited video is really useful for kind of making a short video. Again, like Ben said, aggregating other people's videos. You could put that all into one 5-minute piece, and then people who were not able to attend something or sharing what happened around the world, for example, in Millions Missing, to have that in one video that shows the breadth of experience, it could be really affecting. And it allows you, again, to use it again and again and have archives, which becomes more and more important as you go forward. And that's me. So thank you so much. Please feel free to email me or get in touch with me. I'm really happy to talk to people about this information. This is my passion and my wheelhouse, and I'm just so happy to have joined you today. Thank you, and I'll see you in the Q&A.
Great. Thanks, Jen. So just give me a minute to switch over to the next slides. So our next short presentation is going to be from a colleague who is in Scotland. Janet, if you want to unmute yourself. So what we're going to do now is just have two very short presentations, because I thought it might be helpful for folks to actually kind of take what Jen just said and actually see real live examples from folks around the world who actually have had some successes getting the attention of the press, or getting stories published, or getting to be interviewed on TV or radio. So Janet.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes. And great. Can you see the slides?
I can, yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. And so just when you're ready, just say next and I'll switch the slide.
Okay. That's great. Thanks a lot, Terry, and thank you, Jennifer. That's really interesting, and I think we learned a lot. We could have done with the talk before we actually ran the protest, but because you'll hear me talking about a lot of the lessons that you just talked us through here. So I'm Janet Sylvester. I'm from Edinburgh in Scotland, and I worked with my daughter Emma, who has ME, who you can see being interviewed on the bottom left-hand side at the protest. Emma's had ME for about 5 years now. She's 24, and she decided in March that she wanted to run a Millions Missing protest, the first one in Scotland that's ever been done. First time we'd ever done anything like that, so we went up a huge learning curve, and we were we far achieved anything we expected. We got I think about a dozen newspaper articles in Scotland, ranging from the local press right up to the national press. We had 3 radio interviews on the day of the protest, and we got a brief mention on the BBC News. So really pleased with the impact that we had, and we're hoping to continue that once Emma's well enough to continue with the work that started on May the 12th. Just to explain, we kind of took the ME action concept, which and you can see in that middle slide, in the middle photo there, the photographers loved the shoes. The shoes just worked absolutely fantastically. We had over 100 pairs of shoes at the protest, and they proved a real visual impact on the day. We managed to appeal to not only journalists but also to members of parliament, and the picture on the top right hand side is one of the journalists who'd written an article about Emma, who came along to the protest and read out some of the poems that people had sent in and encouraged other people to read out their poems, which, if you're interested, you can see in the video on YouTube of our protest. The bottom one is our member of the Scottish Parliament, Ben, who's Emma and my local MP, who became eventually, after a lot of hard work, emails and phone calls, became very involved with the protest and is continuing to help us. On the day, we had a really, really powerful message going out there. We had about 100 people at the protest, and the impact was fantastic. Next slide, please. Just to tell you a bit about how we did it. Jennifer talked about the press release, and absolutely right. We spent quite a lot of time preparing, not only for the press release, but also for interviews and various things that were happening. So here's an extract from our press release. And one of the things we did in the preparation, sort of end of March, beginning of April time, we tried to find people who are famous in Scotland who might support us. And Stuart Murdoch, who's the lead singer in a very, very well-known Scottish group called Bell and Sebastian, has ME. And I contacted him through his agent on the website. I just got his agent's name off the website, emailed him, and he sent back this Stuart Murdoch sent back this fantastic quotes, which the press really picked up on. If you can read it, Jen mentioned about storytelling there. I think it's a fantastic story just in those few sentences. And Ali Smith, who's a well-known Scottish writer, also has ME and gave us another quote. We really worked to use the quotes to get us publicity. We spent several weeks up till middle of April just trying to get as many contacts as we could. We spent a lot of time drawing up lists of our members of parliament, drawing up lists of journalists and researching them. Emma put a huge amount of effort into researching ME, the history of ME, specifically looking at the story of ME in Scotland, how many people have it, what research has been done, all that type of thing. And it kind of came together towards the end of April, about 3 weeks before the protest, when I sent an email to a reporter who, and this is very convoluted, talking about using contacts here. My sister lives in Boston in the States. She happened to know a journalist who lived in London who knew a journalist who lives in Glasgow. So there was a really long, convoluted way of getting in touch with her. But I got in touch with Anna, who was a journalist in Glasgow, and she just gave us a really fantastic support. If you can see the next slide, she came to interview Emma at home at the beginning of May, and she wrote that article on the left in the Daily Record. Daily Record has, as I've just put in there, about 3 million readers in Scotland. Now, there are only just over 5 million people living in Scotland. It's a really widespread readership. She came to interview Emma at home. And as Jen said earlier, it was very much on Emma's terms. Emma and I were both very, very nervous about this first interview. Sorry, it's quite emotional watching it. But Anna was very, very helpful. She was very sympathetic, and she told Emma's story very, very sympathetically. It was it was an hour and a half long interview. Towards the end of April, it took nearly 2 weeks for the article to actually appear, but it had an amazing impact. Sorry, I hadn't realised this would be such an emotional thing to see here. But this really kick-started our media campaign. And what Jen said about the storytelling was so true, was that we had no idea that Emma would become the story. And it was very difficult for both of us, I think, for Emma to be taken back to when she was first diagnosed with ME, and to be talked through the impact it had on her. So I would say this was a really difficult time for us both, for us as a family in general. But what it did was, it, as Anna the journalist made very clear to us, it gave her a story to tell, and it gave huge impact in Scotland in terms of the combination of Emma's story plus the research that Emma had done, the facts and figures she had. The other article there you can see was written in our local newspaper on the 11th of May, and this was a local guy, Jerry, who came along to the protest, and he did a big spread in the evening news in Edinburgh on Emma and ME in general. He'd done a lot of research into ME before he came to see Emma, and has been a real supporter for us as well. Next slide. We also, and this was again, just working away with the contacts. We got articles into the Scotsman and Scotland on Sunday. Scotsman is what we would call a broadsheet paper, which is a sort of slightly more serious than the Daily Record, possibly. And one of the ME community in Edinburgh, her partner happens to sit opposite this reporter, Kevin Christie, who wrote this article about Emma. He wrote in the Scotsman. He did this follow-up article, which is on the right-hand side, when he did a more serious bit about ME and mentioned a lot of the facts that Emma had given him. Jen was so right when she said, write a press release that gives them the story, because I think all the journalists that spoke to us basically used the story we'd given them in the press release, and they didn't, apart from Jerry in the local paper, hadn't gone out and really done any research themselves, which was a bit of a shock, I think, to Emma and me. But it was a very useful from our side. He did one article on the 6th of May, he did another article the day before the protest, and then he continued to write articles after the protest, and bring up lots of different aspects of ME in those articles. So both, the whole media bit really came together. Next slide. We did manage to get a little bit on television, and that was again just emailing people. Kay Adams, who's mentioned there, did a program on ME last year, so I emailed her producer, and they agreed to do something. They asked us if there was any experts who could appear, so we put them in touch with the ME Association and a guy, Charles Shepherd, who's quite well known in the UK as the medical advisor at the ME Association, which is our big national charity in the UK. So Emma and I joined in a phone-in with Charles Shepherd really being the main focal point of it, because he knew a lot about ME. And this was something that ME Association put up on their website, again just helping us promote it, and it was great. It was a really good long article, good long program. I appeared on the breakfast news at about 9 o'clock in the morning on another program, and Emma appeared later in the evening, also on radio, so we got good radio coverage. Next slide. Yeah, it was interesting, and this was completely by chance. That there was a news agency called the Press Association in the UK, and their reporter, we sent off just a standard press release to them, but it turned out the Scottish Edinburgh news reporter, her brother has ME, and she has become again a real contact for us. But she got articles in Aberdeen, in Orkney, in Glasgow, Inverness, all over the place, just lots of different articles about the Millions Missing protest. and she's really keen to keep in touch with us. So we're hoping that we can continue the story with her, and keep up this sort of local stuff going on. More local stuff we have, the more people are getting in touch with us to tell us their stories as well. Next slide, which I think might be the last one. So, sorry, that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I hope I've got the main points over. I think the big thing for looking back on it was that we spent 2 or 3 weeks just trying to get contacts, doing research, building up relationships with people. And so by the time we actually started contacting journalists and the media, we had a really good story to tell them. What we hadn't realized at all was that they would latch onto Emma as the personal story. And that was a really big thing for us, because Emma became very ill before we actually had to stop getting in touch with the media because she couldn't handle the interviews at all. And she's still really recovering from that. So I think, certainly a word of warning to anyone attempting to do this sort of thing is it's just exhausting. And although I was involved as her to help her and as much as I could, the media wanted to talk to her. She was a storyteller, and she had a very powerful story to tell. I think the press release, as Jen mentioned earlier, really important to us. We combined the research that Emma had done with the personal story, with the celebrity quotes. We had a headline. The headline was "Meet the Millions Missing." It's a protest to raise awareness at the Scottish Parliament. That worked really well. And there was a lot of luck involved. By chance, there was a debate on ME at the Scottish Parliament the day before our protest, because as part of ME Awareness Day, that involved more members of Parliament. And since then, we started to work with some of the parliamentary people who showed an interest. And it's just a real mix. We've now got something to take forward. Once Emma's well enough to do that, we're hoping to start campaigning on much broader issues. As a result of the media coverage, the ME community in Scotland have really come forward to help Emma and to try and move things forward in Scotland. And we're hoping we can really change things in the future. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Janet.
Thank you, Janet. I just want to say, this is Ben Suborger. Just want to interrupt Terry and say, Janet, that there's lots of love and encouragement in the chat box for both you and Emma. So please pass on the wishes of all the community to both of you and to Emma.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Janet. So I'm just going to go. Unfortunately, Retha was having some issues with her internet. So I'm going to probably not do as good a job as she would, but I will attempt to kind of share what she wanted to share. And then after that, we'll open it up for discussion. So Retha is with the MECFS Foundation in South Africa. And this is her presentation about the media coverage that they've received in South Africa. So this is a map of South Africa. There's 9 provinces. The population is about 56 plus million. And there's a lot of issues that are going on in South Africa. There's high rates of unemployment. There's a lot of poverty, people living in shacks. They certainly have a pretty severe AIDS epidemic, tuberculosis. Their public health system is in pretty bad shape. There's very high crime rates, and there's extremely little knowledge regarding ME, and it's basically zero priority. She lives in this province, which I cannot pronounce, but you can see. So the arrow pointing to where she lives. And just a little bit about the MECFS Foundation in South Africa. It originally started as a Facebook support group in 2012, and then the actual foundation started in 2016 with, of course, a much broader scope with active advocacy attached to it. This is their Facebook page, a screenshot of it. They also have their own website, which you'll see here. Through social media, they have the ability to fundraise through selling different items to benefit the foundation. In terms of the media coverage, there have been interviews with people with ME and their respective municipal newspapers. Their big break came with a carte blanche television program. If you'll look to the far left, that is actually the journalist interviewing. To the far right is actually kind of the logo for the opening of the television program. The story that was done, the video went viral. It's over 70,000 views. YouTube version also has several thousand views. This link here that you see is where you can actually watch the entire interview, and I would really encourage you to go to that YouTube link to watch it. It's actually a really great interview that I think was done very respectfully and with compassion about the topic. Here's Retha. She was one of the people who got interviewed. She does a really great job in it. Like I said, I watched it, and I would encourage folks to watch it as well. Because of this media coverage, there was really great response. There was a lot of doors that were open in terms of like printed articles, radio interviews. There was about 4 television interviews. There was 2 so far that followed as a result of it. And they were very fortunate to have had and still get a fair amount of online and offline media coverage as a result of it. So, I guess my takeaway when I heard Retha sharing this with me and kind of prep calls for our day was that, if you have kind of this one big break, it really can kind of snowball and maybe probably piques the interest of other journalists like, hey, maybe this is something I should pay attention to. And then they'll, kind of get on the bandwagon and do a story as well. In terms of May 12th, which as we all know is our recognized ME Awareness Day, it was really huge in terms of media coverage. And it also, there was the lighting of a landmark, which I'll show you a picture of in a minute, that got online and offline media coverage. Here is the landmark that was lit up in blue. And there was an article in a local newspaper that just kind of recognizes why this landmark was lit up. And then it was part of kind of a global day of raising awareness about ME. You see a person in front of it holding a sign with the hashtag Millions Missing, which then again, if somebody saw this in the newspaper, they may kind of go type in Millions Missing and kind of see all of the additional information that are tied to that hashtag. In terms of kind of some things to think about, really building relationships in social media is to continue to build relationships with journalists who follow the work of the South Africa ME Foundation, because from time to time they want to publish updates. And that's something that Retha and I talked about as well as Jana, is that, at the end of the day, you don't want it just to be kind of a one and done relationship with a journalist. You really want them to put your name and contact information in their Rolodex, and that anytime something about ME comes up, you're the person that they go to, that you're kind of the expert that they look to, which helps us make sure that our story is told accurately if we're considered the expert. So really encouraging to continue to maintain and build those relationships. Again, the media coverage in South Africa has basically snowballed. Again, online radio stations and magazines, they were approached they approached a few, and some saw the post on Facebooks, also in non-ME groups. The feedback they received was and remains a result of the media coverage that they received. And they got people with ME contacted them as a result of the stories, and they also have people contact them that are medical professionals, which is great. Future plans for the foundation is to make the most of the film Unrest to raise awareness and funds for the foundation to continue to assist people with ME. And one of their big plans is to invite the media at each of the screening. So Retha says, thank you for your time. Greetings from South Africa. She has a much cuter accent than I do. So, so hopefully I did that justice. So let me, and I appreciate Retha putting these slides together, and I'm kind of heartbroken that she didn't get to do this. So I'm going to stop sharing the slides, and we now have some time for Q&A, and I realized that a lot of our stuff went over time because we had a little slow start. So if people want to stay on a little after our 2:30, like, I'm completely available and open to that. But this time we should open up the lines and unmute ourselves. We have about 35 people on our call. So I'll try to keep it as orderly and moving along as possible. And so if you have a question or something that you want directed at one of our speakers, if you can just introduce yourself first, maybe say where you're from, and then let us know if you have a question for Jen, if you have a question for Janet, and maybe if there's a question for Retha, you can put it on the chat.
Great.
Okay.
And this is Ben Seaborger. I just want to jump in for a second. So, Terry, what I think we'll do first is we'll hold off anybody who's on their computers, hold off on your questions first, and I'm going to unmute the telephone lines if people have things. And then, Terry, I'm afraid, sign off early,
Okay.
but I'll let you manage the things after that. So first, I'm going to just unmute some of these phone lines so that you can speak if you guys have any questions. Does anybody who's on a phone line have a question? All right. Well, I guess if there's no phone questions, we can move on to anybody on the video calls who wants to ask a question.
I have a question.
Great. Go ahead, Deborah.
My name is Deborah Main, and I live in Austin, Texas, and this is all very new to me. So one big question I have is I understand that this whole ME Millions Missing is coming out of the UK or Europe or many different places over there. Is there a Millions Missing in the United States movement?
Right. So Millions Missing started via ME Action. So it was an idea that was came up with from a woman with ME in North Carolina, Stacey Hodges. So it was kind of a global kind of protest movement and that we called Millions Missing. So there was 2 last year. And so anybody can join Millions, create their own Millions Missing protests.
So in the United States, people are familiar with that.
Yes, it started. Yes, there was ones in Washington, D.C., New York City, Texas, all over the place. So I just want to make sure, just for the interest of time, if people can just try to ask questions related to the content of our presentations today, just because I want to make sure we take advantage of Jen and Janet and Retha's knowledge about press and social media. Anybody have any questions or comments or want to share maybe things that they've done?
I've got a question.
I will, Amina, we can't really hear you.
Oh, there we go.
There we go.
Okay. Oh, alrighty. I had a question. I'm Wilhelmina Jenkins. I'm in Atlanta. My question is about how to make an old story new again. A lot of what happens in terms of the United States, and especially in my area, people feel that the story has been told already. That it was a story at the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, in which there was a lot of publicity. There was a ton of publicity about this illness back then. And then it died off at I would say, the beginning of this millennium to almost nothing. When you contact people, they feel like the story has been told already. I know a lot of people, Julie, for example, makes a hook with the PACE study, and that brings it into an updated story. I think the same thing will happen with the movie Unrest. Are there any other ways of updating a story that's been told before? Just for people who were not aware at the time, back in the late 80s, early 90s, people were on every talk show you can think of, every newspaper you can think of, every magazine, particularly women's magazines that you can think of. So there are many people who began to think of this as an old story, even a fad of that period of time, and do not understand that people have remained sick, that were sick back then and are still sick now. You can't name a show that we were not on at some point or another talking about this illness, one or another of it. And I'd like to know about how you update a story like that. What is your hook to bring them up to date? I know PACE, I know the movie. I just wondered if you had any other ideas.
Is this directed at Jen, or is that
really? But yeah.
Okay.
Hi, Wilhelmina. Thank you for your question, and it's a great one. I think you already kind of tapped into some of the answers as you were speaking. That you obviously you understand really clearly how the media works, and that a news hook is what the news is looking for all the time. Something I've noticed in some of the stuff I've read about Emmy, both in the last couple of years, because I know Terry, and also because in preparation for this call, is the era you're referring to is often referred to, but just as an era, sort of like pretty much what you said is included in some paragraph buried in a lot of stories, and then that's it. So I think something to think about would be, so there's two things. One is to make sure that doesn't have to be a disadvantage. The fact that you've been doing this activism, that you've had Emmy, and that you know other people who've had Emmy for as long as you have, kind of makes you statesmen of the movement. You can speak of what you've seen, and you can add something to a story that is topical, that grounds it in the last 40 years of dealing with this. So I would say, maybe just whatever coverage you've had, and again, please feel free to contact me. I'm happy to talk this out with you, to sort of find a few really key moments that define, how people were overlooked, and make that very personal, or how there was a lot of interest and then it went away, and make that personal. Then that gives you material with which to hook into current news items and current stories that are being told. What I will say is you can't, unfortunately, the problem with hooking into news items is they're just not available all the time. So you have these opportunities like the film, and other media as it comes out, and events. And I think the more, that's one of the great things about activism is when you create campaigns and events and action, you create news stories. And I think as activists, we have to remember that that's what we're doing. We're creating opportunities for media. We're not only creating an action to reach the public, but we want to reach through the media and tell that story via the action to the public. So that's another way to think about it, I think, is in what can you do, and what's happening globally and nationally, but also what could folks do in Atlanta, whether that's tied in to already determined days, or if there's something else, if there's a town hall, if there's something going on in healthcare. I would say a lot of it is keeping up with what's happening in the news and finding ways to tie in. I hope that's helpful. Thanks for your question.
Great. Other questions? I think we have somebody.
I don't have a question, but I said that I'd say something if I was still here at this point.
Sure.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
You are. I sort of had a written discussion with you about what we've done with the Stop Get campaign, which is a more like, obviously it's relevant everywhere, but it's a more UK-based campaign, and we haven't got as much in the papers as we'd like to have done. Like overall, I wouldn't like sort of flag it up as a success story, but something that has worked out is I sort of realised that a local paper called the Bristol Cable would be quite a useful paper to get something in, and we haven't done like a general press release type of thing, but we've more like identified particular places to try and get the message out, and particularly why I thought of the Bristol Cable was that paper it's an independent cooperative, and they like to do like investigative journalism, especially like things challenging the establishment, which is often actually quite different from a lot of the main papers. And they also like to write about the University of Bristol, and that's the university where Magenta and Fitnet are coming out of, which are sort of main trials that we're concerned about, and also their trials on children, so there's like a bit more of a sort of emotive hook there as well. And I know, like living in Bristol myself, I know that the readership are a bit more likely to be like social justice warrior type people than, because there's also the Bristol Post, which is a slightly different type of newspaper. So in terms of what you were saying about how you title emails, I sent an email called Controversial University of Bristol Research on Children, and then sort of explains why I wanted to write about it. And they let me do a 400-word op-ed, but it was really hard to write about the whole topic that succinctly. But they picked it up as obviously that there was a much bigger story behind it. And then a few months later, last month, they did a sort of more thorough, I don't know how long it was, but it was much longer, more thorough piece. The journalist spent a couple of hours with David Tuller and interviewed me by email for what you were saying, like at the time I wasn't well enough to speak. And also that I think is generally better if you're not so obviously well that it's fib, but I think it's generally better because you have time, and also I could go back to other Emmy Action people and ask them, they were sort of giving ideas on how I should be phrasing it, where obviously if it's like a phone call or in-person interview, you just have to say on the cuff, don't you, you might misspeak or whatever. I could put I don't know if other people have seen it, I could put the links in the chat of with the two articles, so my short one and then their longer one. But I think, there were advantages when it's a journalist who doesn't have Emmy writing the piece, because it comes across as more balanced. But then there will also be things that we don't like, just that come across, because I like quite consistently use the term ME, which people here do tend to. And in her piece, it was like CFS. Although she does mention that it's. I think at the beginning she just mentioned it's also called ME, but that way round rather than the other. But yeah, generally people seem to think that it was a better piece than the national papers had done. So so we were quite pleased with that as an outcome. But it was obviously a few months in coming and like developing that relationship. Mm-hmm. Although a question I'd have for like coming out of that sort of stuff, which actually this journalist didn't do, but do you have any ideas about how we can stop journalists keep using the phrase yuppie flu? It's been like 30 years or something. They just keep saying yuppie flu. Nobody else talks about yuppies anymore, do they?
Right. I have a couple things I just want to say before I answer your question, and thank you for your question. I just want to point out a couple of, I thought your example was excellent and illustrative, getting a lot of feedback. Thank you. I'm sorry. Perfect. Thank you. First of all, I think it was brilliant that you did a couple things so well. I just want to highlight them. You investigated very thoroughly the publications and their slant, the kinds of stories they would write. You appealed to sort of a more social justice oriented publication. And you had a really succinct, great header in your email. I also think it's fantastic and shows how relationships do develop. They do take time. It can take months, and those months can feel really excruciating because you want it to happen now. But that you wrote this op-ed and that led to a larger story is something that can happen. And as Terry said, it established you and, you know, as the expert, as the person to come to on those stories. So that was all really well done. As to your question as to how to change language, I can give examples coming from the HIV/AIDS world where there's a lot of stigmatizing language and a lot of outdated language that is still used by reporters. In fact, there was a very good article in Mic.com, which I think is just a national platform here, but it's a news platform. And an article was written maybe a year or two ago in the wake of Charlie Sheen coming out about being HIV positive, talking about how reporters should report on HIV, because some of the language that was being used in the media, it made it very clear that the reporter hadn't written a story on AIDS or HIV in about 20 years, and the medication has changed, the treatment has changed. How people live with HIV has changed. And as you said, yuppie flu in this case is incredibly outdated and old-fashioned. I have seen it in articles about ME with quotes around it, and I think in that context, rather like Wilhelmina was saying earlier, if the story is talking about the whole history of ME and awareness of it, and that's where awareness originated, that's all right. But outside of those quotes, or if, like you said, where the reporter said CFS over and over again, I think it would be fine to follow up with an email with that reporter and, you know, thank the reporter very kindly for the story, but also to say within the ME community, we say ME and have a line or two about why. And something to think about is using language that is appropriate and then being able to point to, with reporters, reasons why that language is appropriate. Maybe even writing up guidelines is something that you'd want to think about when speaking to reporters and to give to reporters. This is something that is, I think, not uncommon around illness-related activism. My editor at The Body, which Terry and I both write for, and that she mentioned earlier, even had to reach out and have a long conversation on the phone with a CNN reporter maybe 6 months ago about some stigmatizing language that reporter used that was purely accidental, that was not intended. It was just a lack of information and education, and the reporter was actually very grateful for that knowledge. But I think it is an ongoing issue. It can be really aggravating, especially when you know your information and other people don't. But it's part of opening up and creating better communication and understanding.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion for the ME community. Maybe the project we can all work on together about a kind of just a one-pager guide to reporting on ME. Like Jen mentioned, the HIV community has kind of several documents that are kind of circling throughout the world. Just to give a quick example, like in the early years of the AIDS epidemic, people with HIV were constantly being called AIDS victims. And victims is a very kind of disempowering term to people. So there's an explanation like why referring to a person with HIV as an AIDS victim is not appropriate, that people with HIV prefer to be referred to as person with HIV, person living with HIV. So like helpful tips like that, like I feel like we as a community could probably brainstorm together and, you know, come up with a document that like we could just provide to reporters that can kind of help and explain at the same time, like, you know, help set a culture on how to report about us and how to.
Yeah, I think that would be really good because also it wouldn't be personal. So it wouldn't be saying that they done it wrong.
Right.
We would get in beforehand.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way we word it is like guidelines to successful reporting on ME, some tips, some tips, or, something like that, where it doesn't feel like you do a terrible job reporting on it.
The MEpedia has it. The MEpedia has it.
Someone has it.
Who has it? The MEpedia has such a guideline page.
Yeah, okay. So maybe bringing that forward and just making sure people are aware of it, placing it somewhere on the website would be really helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I know we're super behind, and I know people are probably crashing. Anybody else have one final question or comment that they want to make before we close out?
Hi, this is Cindy Downey from Canada.
Hi.
Hi. I just want to say thank you very much to everybody. It's been really, really helpful and inspiring, and gives us hope to continue on with working with those journalists and so on.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thanks for holding this. And
yes, I'm going to say thank you too.
Bye-bye.
Great. Anybody have a final question before we close out?
I think there's a question in the chat. I'm trying to scroll up and look for it.
Thank you.
Is it Lisa? Can you recommend a program for video editing, a basic one for beginners?
It's up higher, actually.
Okay.
At Nexus Owl.
Yeah, I can't, unfortunately. If Lisa wants to email me, I can send her some things that are on my computer, which I'm not on right now.
Sorry.
I would like to ask for some strategies on grabbing press attention.
Sorry, say it again.
I would like to ask for some strategies on grabbing press attention.
Strategies on grabbing press attention.
It's a long one. Do you see it?
I'll take a look, Alana. Thank you.
Oh, here it is.
Okay. Alana, can you move back out just so I can have feedback? Thank you. I would like to ask for some strategies on grabbing press attention when you're not on an association or representing that many people. We are mostly undiagnosed and not in contact. And I would like to make press know about what's happening globally. One time, people who don't know they have ME know about it. We have some feedback. If everyone can feedback. Great. Thank you. Okay, that's great. That is a great question. Thank you, and thank you, Alana, for getting our attention to it. I would say a good strategy. That's a tough one. I mean, there's a few things. One is if you are comfortable on or already using social media or curious about social media, that is a good way to start just building up your own community. And again, hashtags is an easy way to do that. Searching for Millions Missing or ME Action or other common hashtags is a way to find people and also have people start to hear about your story. As far as working with the press, I think, again, I think I've said this to a couple of people, but really writing out your own personal story and that of those people that you know with ME, if you can write, if you could do that on just through audio recording and then transcribe it or have it transcribed, or have a friend write it down for you, even if it takes some time, and being able to kind of look at that objectively or have a couple of people look at it with you and find what some key strong points are that if the reader were not your close friend or someone who already knew your story would find very captivating and interesting. And start with that. Have maybe 2 or 3 lines that would be your introduction to writing an op-ed in the local paper, or your introduction to a letter to the editor or a personal pitch about larger stories. You can also utilize, and I don't know what ME Action's specific guidelines are on this, so I'm sorry if I'm speaking out of turn, but when there are major events or campaigns, I think it's really fine to personalize that with, I am this person, I am living in this town, I've had ME for this number of years, go into the press release and then maybe prior to that say, these 1 or 2 lines about your own experience, that this is a national action that's happening and you are available to provide local perspective. When you are in a smaller town and outside of a major city, I think what's interesting about a story to a reporter is going to be it's happening to someone there. And certainly lack of health access or lack of medical access are really, I think, evergreen in a lot of places right now, because these are trials that many of us are going through around the world and dealing with. So being able to have personal and human aspect on that could help a reporter with a larger story or a story on ME. That would be where I would start.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great idea, because at least in the United States, there's this obviously huge conversation around access to healthcare, and making sure that the ME story is part of that larger story is great. And then, I think the other strategy to just kind of be mindful of is that we now have the opportunity to have community screenings of unrest. And so making sure that if you're even interested in having an unrest screening in your community and getting that set up, then leads an opportunity to getting press not only about this amazing documentary, but also about our stories from a local community perspective. Like, this is a documentary that's being shown around the world, but there are people with ME that are in this town that we want you to report about. So they could talk about the documentary, but then also do, a local story on a local person who's living with ME and what that's like.
Can I say one more thing?
Sure. And then we're going to close.
Okay. I just want to say one more thing, because I just want to jump on that. This goes back to, I don't know if Wilhelmina's still listening, but back to your question. One thing that I've seen around documentaries is they really work well for historical stories. So a writer might see a documentary, or a reviewer might see a documentary and then say, let's talk about ME at 50 or ME at whatever age, and this is what's happening now, and then look at it historically. So that's another opportunity, I think, around the film to think about telling other stories.
Yeah. I think that's a great point, because in the documentary, there's the story of Omar, Jen's husband, and her. There's a story of another family. There's a story of a single woman. I think there's a lot of things that you could play with. Like, if a reporter came to do a story about unrest, they could then do a story about a married couple, kind of to piggyback on the documentary. They could do a story about a woman of color. They could do a story about a person who is severely ill versus maybe not as ill. I think there's a lot of, a person who had to drop out of school like Jen did. So I think there's a lot of things to kind of ping pong off of based on the documentary. So it's 2:52. We're so well over time. I'm starting to crash. My brain's starting to go a little crazy. And my neck's hurting. And so my body's telling me it's time to go. But I want to thank everybody for coming. I think this was really great for me personally to kind of review and think through kind of the things that I want to do in New York around press. And I hope it was helpful for other people. Just a reminder, we want to continue to do these activist teach-ins. If you have a topic, please email me at tlwilder, that's WILDER, at mindspring.com. I'm also going to put it in the chat. Because a lot of our topics come from you. And when I get requests for things, I start looking for speakers and start looking for people in our community that can give a personal perspective of maybe something that's tied to that topic. So please keep sending me suggestions of topics that you're interested in to continue building our movement as activists. So I'm going to close here and thank everyone for joining us on this, for some of us, Sunday evening, morning, afternoon, evening, breakfast time, whatever it was for you. So thanks so much. It's great seeing all of your faces, and we'll see you next time. So have a good day. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.